I still remember the sound of his laughter. It was loud, sharp, and filled with confidence. We were standing among hundreds of people in Mecca when he looked directly at me and mocked my faith in Jesus Christ. "You still believe in Jesus?" he said with a smile. "Here." A few people around him laughed. I tried to remain silent. But then he said something that I will never forget. "If your Jesus is really who you say he is, let him prove it." I looked at him. For a moment, I had no answer. Not because I had stopped believing, but because I knew that something was about to happen. And what happened a few minutes later left the entire group completely silent. Before I tell you what happened, I want you to stay with me until the very end, because the final part of this testimony is the part that changed my understanding of faith forever. And if you believe Jesus still changes lives today, take a moment to subscribe and join this growing family of faith. Also, don't hesitate to share your prayer point in the comments. We will stand with you in prayer. Tell us the region or country you're watching from, the exact time you're watching this, and if possible, the year of the event you're connecting with. Someone reading your comment may be encouraged to know that they are not praying alone. Now let me take you back to the beginning. My name is Al-Mukhtar. At least, that is what I will call myself in this dramatized testimony. I grew up believing that I understood everything about faith. I knew the prayers. I knew the traditions. I knew the arguments. I knew how to answer difficult questions, and whenever someone challenged what I believed, I was always ready with an explanation. I was confident. Perhaps too confident. I had spent years surrounded by people who believed exactly as I did, and because everyone around me seemed to agree, I rarely stopped to ask myself whether there were questions I had never honestly confronted. But there was one subject I tried very hard to avoid. Jesus. Not because I had never heard about him. I had heard his name countless times. I had heard people describe him as a prophet, a teacher, a holy man, and an important figure from history. But then something began to disturb me. I met Christians who spoke about Jesus differently. They didn't speak about him as though he were merely someone who had lived centuries ago. They spoke about him as though he were alive. They prayed to him. They trusted him. They called upon him when they were afraid. They believed he could forgive sins. They believed he could change a person's heart. And most disturbing of all, they spoke about him with a kind of peace I could not easily explain. At first, I dismissed it. I told myself they were simply emotional. I told myself they had been taught those things from childhood. I told myself I already knew the truth. But deep inside, another voice kept asking me a question. What if you haven't actually investigated this for yourself? That question frightened me. Because if Jesus really was who these Christians claimed he was, then I would have to confront questions I had spent years avoiding. So I did what many people do when they are afraid of a question. I avoided it. I changed the subject. I argued against Christianity without seriously listening to Christians. I convinced myself that confidence was the same thing as certainty. But it wasn't. Deep inside, I wasn't completely sure. And then I met Hamza. He was older than me, extremely confident, and never afraid to speak his mind. If someone disagreed with him, he would challenge them immediately. If someone presented an argument he didn't like, he would interrupt. And when it came to Christianity, he didn't simply disagree. He mocked it. He laughed at Christians. He made jokes about Jesus. And because everyone around him usually laughed, his confidence only grew. I remember one particular evening when several of us were together, talking about faith and religion. The conversation was relaxed at first. People were laughing. Some were sharing stories. Others were discussing religious questions. Then someone mentioned Jesus. The atmosphere changed almost immediately. Hamza laughed. "Jesus," he said. He shook his head. "You Christians are still talking about Jesus?" A few people laughed. I remained quiet. Then Hamza looked directly at me. "You believe in him too?" For a second, I didn't know what to say. I could have denied it. I could have laughed along with everyone else. It would have been easier. But something inside me refused. So I nodded. Yes. That was when the laughter became louder. Hamza stepped closer. You actually believe Jesus is the answer? I could feel everyone's attention turning toward us. My heart began beating faster. I wanted the conversation to end. I didn't want an argument. I didn't want humiliation. But Hamza wasn't finished. He looked around and then pointed toward the ground. We are in Mecca, he said. He paused. Look around you. Then he looked back at me. This is not the place for your Christian stories. Someone laughed. Another person whispered something to the man beside him. I felt embarrassed. My face became hot. For a moment, I wondered whether I had made a mistake by admitting what I believed. Then I remembered something a Christian friend had once told me. He said, "You don't have to defend Jesus with anger. Sometimes your greatest defense is simply refusing to deny him." Those words came back to me at exactly the right moment. So I looked at Hamza and said quietly, "I don't want to argue with you." He smiled. "Because you know you can't win?" I shook my head. "No." I looked directly into his eyes. "Because I don't need to hate you to believe in Jesus." For a moment, the laughter stopped. There was silence. I thought perhaps the conversation was over. But Hamza laughed again. He crossed his arms. "Fine," he said. "If Jesus is really alive, let him prove himself." I didn't respond. He continued. "Let him do something." Someone behind him laughed. Another person said something under his breath. I lowered my head. I didn't want a spectacle. I didn't want an argument. I didn't want anyone to get hurt. And honestly, I didn't even want a miracle. I simply wanted peace. So I closed my eyes for a moment and whispered a prayer in my heart. "Jesus, if you really hear me, give me wisdom." That was all. I wasn't asking for fire from heaven. I wasn't asking for an angel. I wasn't asking for some dramatic supernatural display. I wasn't trying to embarrass Hamza. I simply asked for wisdom. But I had no idea how quickly that prayer would be answered. A few minutes passed. The conversation slowly moved on. People started talking about other things. Hamza continued joking with those around him. Then I noticed something. One of the men standing nearby had become unusually quiet. At first, I didn't think much of it. He was standing slightly away from the group. Then he placed one hand against his chest. His face looked different. I watched him carefully. "Are you okay?" someone asked. He didn't answer. He tried to take a step. Then, another. His knees suddenly weakened. He reached for something to support himself. Before anyone could reach him, he collapsed. Everything changed in an instant. The laughter stopped. People rushed toward him. Someone shouted for help. Another person knelt beside him. "Wake up. Can you hear me? Open your eyes." But he didn't respond. His face had become pale. His breathing was weak. For several seconds, nobody knew what to do. The man who had been laughing moments earlier was now lying helplessly on the ground. And suddenly, religion was no longer a debate. Nobody was laughing. Nobody was trying to win an argument. Nobody cared about who was right. Everyone was simply afraid. I knelt beside him. My hands were trembling. I didn't know what to do. I looked around at the faces surrounding me. Fear was written across them. Then I remembered the prayer I had whispered only minutes earlier. "Jesus, if you really hear me, give me wisdom." And suddenly, the name of Jesus came back into my mind. I remembered the Christians I had met. I remembered how they prayed. I remembered how they spoke about Jesus when they were desperate. And something inside me said, "Pray." I hesitated. I knew Hamza was watching. I knew everyone was watching. But I couldn't ignore what was happening. So I leaned closer to the man and whispered, "Jesus, please help him." Hamza immediately turned toward me. "What are you doing?" I didn't answer. I continued, "Jesus, have mercy." Hamza shook his head. "This is not the time for this." His voice was firm. But I kept praying. Not loudly. Not dramatically. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I wasn't trying to prove a theological point. I was simply desperate. "Jesus, please help him." I closed my eyes. "Lord, if you hear me, have mercy." For a few moments, nothing happened. Nothing. The man remained still. Someone was calling for assistance. Another person was trying to keep him comfortable. Hamza stood nearby, watching me. I could feel his eyes on me. Then I heard something. A breath. A deep breath. I opened my eyes. The man's fingers moved. At first, I thought I had imagined it. Then his hand moved again. "Wait," someone said. Everyone became silent. The man slowly opened his eyes. Nobody moved. He took another deep breath. Then, another. His face began to regain its color. Someone whispered, "He's awake." Everyone froze. I looked at Hamza. His expression had completely changed. There was no laughter anymore. No sarcasm. No confidence. Just shock. The man looked around. His eyes moved from one face to another. Then he asked, "What happened?" Nobody answered. He tried to sit up. Several people immediately supported him. "Take it slowly." He looked confused. I don't understand." He touched his face. Then his chest. He took another deep breath. "What happened to me?" Still, nobody answered. He looked directly at me. "Why were you praying?" My heart began pounding again. I didn't know what to say. So I simply told him the truth. "You collapsed." He looked at me. I remember feeling weak. He paused. "But after that." He stopped speaking. "What?" someone asked. He looked around nervously. I thought I heard someone calling me. Everyone became silent. "Who?" He shook his head. "I don't know." "What did the voice say?" He looked down. Then he whispered, "Don't be afraid." The words sent chills through me. Hamza was still standing nearby. He hadn't spoken for several minutes. I looked at him. He looked at me. Neither of us knew what to say. The man slowly stood with assistance. His breathing was now steady. He looked around at everyone. "I feel different." Someone asked, "Are you sure you're okay?" He nodded. "Yes." Then he looked at me again. "What exactly did you pray?" I hesitated. I could feel everyone's attention returning to me. I said, "I prayed in the name of Jesus." Silence. Complete silence. Nobody laughed. Nobody mocked me. Nobody made a joke. And Hamza, the same man who had challenged me only minutes earlier, lowered his eyes. He didn't say a word. For the first time that evening, I realized something. Perhaps the real miracle wasn't simply what had happened to the man who collapsed. Perhaps the real miracle was what was happening inside all of us. Because minutes earlier, we had been arguing about God. Now we were standing together in complete silence. And the man who had mocked Jesus the loudest was no longer laughing. He was staring at the ground, wrestling with a question he could no longer easily dismiss. What if Jesus really is alive? I looked at Hamza. He was no longer laughing. The confidence that had filled his face only moments earlier had disappeared. He was staring at the man who had collapsed, as though he was trying to understand something that his mind could not explain. Then he looked at me. "What did you say?" His voice was quieter now. I answered, honestly. I prayed for him. Hamza's eyes narrowed. To whom? For a moment, I hesitated. I could feel everyone around us listening. Then I said, Jesus. His face changed. It was subtle at first. His eyebrows tightened. His lips parted slightly. Then he looked away. For several seconds, he said nothing. Finally, he looked back at me. You think that was Jesus? I could have claimed that I understood exactly what had happened. I could have told him that I had all the answers. But I didn't. I wasn't there to prove something I couldn't prove. So I simply said, I know what I prayed. Hamza stared at me. He didn't respond. Around us, the atmosphere had become strangely quiet. The same people who had been laughing earlier were now standing silently. Nobody wanted to make another joke. Nobody wanted to restart the argument. Everyone was watching the man who had collapsed. Then he spoke. And what he said made my heart stop. While I was unconscious, he paused. Everyone turned toward him. I heard someone calling my name. The room seemed to become even quieter. Someone asked, Who? He swallowed. I don't know. What did he look like? The man closed his eyes. For several seconds, he seemed to be searching through his memory. I couldn't see his face clearly. I felt chills move through me. But I knew I was not alone. Nobody interrupted him. He continued. I heard a voice telling me not to be afraid. I looked at Hamza. His face had gone completely still. Nobody laughed. Nobody mocked Jesus. Nobody interrupted. Nobody even seemed interested in continuing the argument. Something had changed. But at the time, I didn't understand what. I thought perhaps Hamza was simply shocked by what had happened. I thought perhaps by the next morning, he would return to his old confidence. I was wrong. Because the real battle that night wasn't happening around us. It was happening inside Hamza. After a few minutes, Hamza quietly walked away from the group. He didn't announce where he was going. He didn't say goodbye. He simply turned and walked toward a quieter area. I watched him disappear from the others. Something inside me told me to follow him. So I did. When I reached him, he was standing alone. His back was turned toward me. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. The sounds of people in the distance seemed strangely far away. Finally, Hamza spoke. Al-Mukhtar. Yes. He didn't turn around. I need to ask you something. What? There was a long pause. Then he asked. Why were you so calm? I was confused. What do you mean? He finally turned toward me. When that man collapsed, he said, everyone panicked. He looked directly into my eyes. But you weren't shouting. I shook my head. I was afraid. No. His voice became softer. You were afraid, but you were not hopeless. Those words struck me. Because he was right. I had been afraid. My hands had trembled. My heart had raced. I had no idea whether the man would recover. I had no idea what was going to happen. But somehow, beneath the fear, there had been something else. Hope. A strange confidence that I wasn't alone. That moment taught me something I would never forget. Faith doesn't always remove fear. Sometimes faith simply gives you somewhere to take your fear. I looked at Hamza. He seemed different now. The man who had mocked me earlier was gone. Standing before me was someone who had begun wrestling with questions much deeper than an argument. Then he said, Tell me, honestly. I waited. Why Jesus? The question sounded simple. But it wasn't. I knew immediately that this was different from every other question he had asked me that night. He wasn't trying to trap me. He wasn't trying to embarrass me. He wasn't trying to win an argument. He genuinely wanted to understand. So I took a breath. and I began telling him what I had been discovering. I told him that for years, I had thought faith was primarily about knowing the right answers. I thought being confident meant never admitting that I had questions. I thought strength meant defeating anyone who disagreed with me. But then Jesus had begun to challenge something deeper in me. He challenged my pride. He challenged my understanding of forgiveness. He challenged the way I viewed people who disagreed with me. I told Hamza, when I read about Jesus, I don't just see someone demanding that people listen to him. I see someone calling broken people to come near. Hamza remained silent. I continued. He showed compassion to people others rejected. He forgave people who had failed. He told people not to respond to hatred with hatred. He taught people to love their enemies and pray for those who persecute them. Hamza looked down. I could tell he was listening carefully. I told him that the more I learned about Jesus, the more I realized that following him wasn't about becoming superior to anyone else. It wasn't about saying, I am better than you. It was about admitting, I need God. I looked at him. I don't follow Jesus because I think I'm better than you. Hamza looked at me. I continued. I follow him because I know I need mercy. Those words came from somewhere deep inside me. For a few seconds, Hamza said nothing. Then he slowly looked away. The silence between us became longer. Then Hamza asked a question I had never expected to hear from him. What if I've spent my whole life believing the wrong thing? My heart sank. Not because I was happy that he was questioning his beliefs, but because I could hear the pain behind his words. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This wasn't a debate. This was a man standing at the edge of everything he thought he knew. I looked at him. You don't have to be afraid of the truth. He shook his head. But what if the truth changes everything? I answered. Then let the truth change everything. He looked at me. I could see tears beginning to form in his eyes. He quickly turned away. For years, I had known Hamza as a man who never wanted anyone to see weakness in him. He was always strong, always confident, always ready with an answer. But now, for the first time, I saw something behind that confidence. Fear. Not fear of me. Not fear of an argument. Fear of discovering that the foundation he had built his life upon might not be as secure as he had believed. I remembered the words of Jesus. Come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Matthew 11 verse 28. I told Hamza, maybe you've been carrying questions for a long time. He nodded slowly. Maybe you've been afraid to ask them. He didn't answer. But you don't have to run from the truth. Hamza looked at me. Where do I start? That question almost broke my heart. Because only a short while earlier, he had been laughing. He had challenged Jesus to prove himself. He had mocked my faith. And now he was asking me where to begin. I didn't give him a complicated answer. I said, start by asking God sincerely to show you the truth. He looked confused. That's it. Start there. I continued. Don't pray because you want to win an argument. Don't pray because you want to prove me wrong. And don't pray because someone is forcing you. I looked into his eyes. Just be honest. He remained silent. Tell God exactly what you're thinking. I continued. If you're confused, tell him you're confused. If you're angry, tell him. If you're afraid, tell him. If you don't know what to believe, tell him. Ask him to lead you into truth. Hamza slowly nodded. Then he looked toward the sky. For the first time that night, there was no laughter, no pride, no argument, just silence. I stood beside him. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Then Hamza closed his eyes. His hands trembled slightly. He whispered, God. He stopped. He opened his eyes again, then closed them. God, if you are hearing me. His voice broke. Show me the truth. I could barely hear him. He continued. I don't want to spend the rest of my life believing something simply because I was afraid to question it. A tear rolled down his cheek. He wiped it away quickly. Then he whispered, if Jesus is truly who Al-Mukhtar says he is. He paused. I don't want to remain blind. I stood beside him in silence. I didn't tell him what to say next. I didn't interrupt. I didn't try to control the moment. I simply prayed quietly. And as Hamza stood there, looking toward the sky, I realized something. The miracle I had been expecting wasn't necessarily going to happen in the way I imagined. Maybe God wasn't interested in proving himself through a spectacle. Maybe he was reaching for something deeper. A human heart. A wounded heart. A questioning heart. A proud heart that had finally become humble enough to say, God, show me the truth. And as we stood there in the silence, I had no idea that this prayer would become the beginning of a journey that would completely change Hamza's life. Because what happened next was something neither of us could have predicted. And I would soon discover that the greatest battle was not over. It had only just begun. Hamza finally whispered, God, if you are there, show me the truth. He stopped. His breathing became uneven. For a few seconds, it seemed as though he was struggling to find the courage to say what he really wanted to say. Then he continued. If Jesus is truly who Al-Mukhtar says he is. He swallowed hard. I don't want to remain blind. I stood beside him. I didn't tell him what he had to say. I didn't force him. I didn't tell him that he had to make a decision that very moment. I simply prayed. Jesus, meet him where he is. The silence around us felt different now. Only hours earlier, Hamza had been the loudest voice in the group. He had laughed. He had mocked. He had challenged my faith. He had demanded proof. But now he was standing quietly, asking God to reveal the truth. And that night, something happened that I will never forget. It wasn't fire. It wasn't thunder. It wasn't a spectacular display in the sky. There was no dramatic sound. No crowd screaming. No supernatural spectacle that everyone could point to. Something much deeper happened. Hamza began to cry. At first, he tried to hide it. He quickly wiped his face. Then he looked away from me. But the tears continued. He wiped them again. Still, they came. Finally, he covered his face with both hands. His shoulders began to shake. I stood there silently. I had never seen him like that. This was the same man who had always appeared strong. The same man who could argue with anyone. The same man who had laughed when I mentioned Jesus. But now he was crying like a child. After several minutes, he looked at me. His eyes were red. I don't know why I'm crying. I looked at him. I didn't have a complicated answer. I simply said, sometimes the heart responds before the mind has finished understanding. He looked down. Those words seemed to reach somewhere deep inside him. He sat down. For several minutes, he simply cried. And I prayed. I didn't celebrate his tears. I didn't use his brokenness as an opportunity to make him feel ashamed. I simply stayed beside him. Because I was beginning to understand that this wasn't about winning an argument. It was about a heart beginning to search. Years later, when I think about that night, I realize something I didn't fully understand at the time. The greatest miracle wasn't necessarily that a man who had become weak eventually recovered. The greatest miracle was what happened inside Hamza. A heart hardened by pride became soft enough to ask questions. A man who had demanded proof was now asking God for truth. A man who had laughed at the name of Jesus was now whispering that name with tears in his eyes. A man who had told me that Christianity was foolish was now wondering whether he had been wrong. And perhaps that was the silence everyone witnessed. Not the silence of fear. Not the silence of defeat. But the silence that comes when pride finally becomes quiet enough to hear. But I want to make something clear. Hamza's journey did not become perfect overnight. There was no magical moment when every question disappeared. There was no instant transformation where suddenly he understood everything. In fact, the days that followed were difficult. He had questions. Many questions. Sometimes he asked questions that I couldn't answer. Sometimes he became frustrated. Sometimes he wondered whether he should continue searching. There were moments when he told me, maybe I should stop thinking about all of this. But then something inside him wouldn't let him stop. He had tasted something he could not easily explain. So he continued. He read. He prayed. He searched. He wrestled with things he had believed for years. He examined the scriptures. He listened. He asked difficult questions. And most importantly, he became willing to investigate honestly. That was the difference. Before that night, Hamza had argued against Jesus without wanting to seriously examine the possibility that he might be wrong. After that night, he began asking, what if I have misunderstood? That question changed everything. One evening, several weeks later, Hamza came to me. He looked tired, but there was something different about him. He sat down beside me. For a while, he didn't speak. Then he finally said, Al-Mukhtar. Yes. I think I owe you an apology. I looked at him. For what? He lowered his head. For the way I mocked you. I remained silent. He continued. I thought I knew everything. He paused. But I realized something. What? I spent years mocking what I had never honestly investigated. Those words humbled me. Because I realized that I had done something similar in my own journey. I had also spent years avoiding questions. I had assumed I knew enough. But genuine faith doesn't have to be afraid of honest investigation. Truth doesn't need fear to protect it. And if someone is genuinely searching, we should not be afraid of their questions. We should point them toward Christ with patience, love, and humility. And perhaps you're watching this story tonight with questions of your own. Maybe you have never told anyone about them. Maybe you've kept them hidden because you're afraid someone will judge you. Maybe you're wondering whether God really exists. Maybe you're wondering whether He hears your prayers. Maybe you're wondering why your situation hasn't changed. Maybe you've been praying for healing for years. Maybe you're facing financial pressure that seems impossible to overcome. Maybe your marriage is struggling. Maybe your family is divided. Maybe someone you love has walked away from God. Maybe you're carrying a secret burden that nobody around you knows about. Or perhaps you've prayed so long that you have started wondering, does God even hear me? If that is you, I want you to hear this carefully. Don't give up. Your situation may be difficult, but God has not stopped being God. Your answer may not come in the way you expect. Your miracle may not look like someone else's miracle. And God's timing may not match your timetable. But keep seeking. Keep praying. Keep trusting. Keep bringing your questions to Him. The Bible says, "Call unto me, and I will answer thee, and shew thee great and mighty things, which thou knowest not." Jeremiah 33 verse 3. And Jesus said, "Ask, and it shall be given you. Seek, and ye shall find. Knock, and it shall be opened unto you." Matthew 7 verse 7. Notice the progression. Ask, seek, knock. Sometimes faith isn't about having every answer immediately. Sometimes faith is simply continuing to knock when the door hasn't opened yet. That night taught me something I will never forget. You don't have to be afraid of sincere questions. You don't have to shout to prove your faith. You don't have to insult someone because they disagree with you. You don't have to humiliate someone because they have doubts. Jesus taught us to love. Jesus taught us to forgive. Jesus taught us to seek truth. And sometimes the most powerful testimony is not winning an argument. Sometimes it is showing someone what the love of Christ looks like when they expect hatred. Hamza expected me to become angry when he mocked my faith. Instead, I prayed for him. He expected me to fight. Instead, I showed him compassion. He expected Christianity to make me arrogant. Instead, he saw me admit that I needed God's mercy too. And that was the testimony he could not easily dismiss. Before we separated that night, Hamza looked at me one final time. His eyes were still red from crying. He looked exhausted. But there was peace in his expression. He said, "Al-Mukhtar, I don't know where this journey will take me." I answered, "Neither do I." He smiled weakly. "But I know one thing." "What?" He looked at me for several seconds. Then he said, "I can't laugh about Jesus anymore." I smiled. "Then perhaps you're finally ready to listen." He looked down. For a moment, he said nothing. Then he whispered, "Maybe I am." Those 3 words stayed with me. Maybe I am. Because sometimes that's where a journey of faith begins. Not with perfect certainty. Not with every question answered. But with a humble heart willing to say, "Maybe I need to look again." That was the moment I understood something. Sometimes God doesn't silence a crowd with thunder. Sometimes he silences a crowd by changing one heart. Sometimes the miracle isn't what happens around you. Sometimes the miracle is what happens inside you. Hamza had wanted to prove that Jesus was powerless. But instead, he found himself questioning his own heart. He had wanted to make everyone laugh. Instead, he became the one standing in silence. He had demanded evidence. But what he received was something much more personal. A reason to seek. And perhaps that is why we should never give up on people. The person who mocks today may be searching tomorrow. The person who laughs today may be crying out to God tomorrow. The person who says, "I will never believe," may one day become the person telling others what Christ has done in their life. So don't give up praying for people. Don't give up loving people. Don't give up showing grace. And don't assume that someone's current attitude is the final chapter of their story. If you are watching this and you feel far from God, don't believe the lie that you are too far gone. If you have mocked God before, you can still turn toward him. If you have doubted, you can still seek. If you have failed, you can still ask for forgiveness. If you have walked away, you can still come home. If you are broken, you can still pray. And if you are waiting for an answer, keep trusting. Jesus said, "Him that cometh to me, I will in no wise cast out." John 6 verse 37. Think about that promise. He didn't say he would receive only perfect people. He didn't say only those who had never doubted could come. He didn't say only those who had everything figured out could approach him. He said, "Him that cometh to me, I will in no wise cast out." That means your past does not have to become your destiny. Your mistakes do not have to be the final chapter. Your doubts do not have to define you forever. Your questions do not have to separate you from God. Come honestly. Come humbly. Come seeking. And let God meet you where you are. And if you're watching this right now, I want you to do something. Don't just watch this story and leave. Take a moment and think about the one thing you've been carrying. The prayer you've been afraid to pray. The person you've been praying for. The situation you've been asking God to change. Bring it before Him. And if you feel comfortable, leave your prayer request in the comments. Tell us what country or region you're watching from, the exact time you're watching, and the year this message or testimony speaks to you. We will pray together. Your comment may become an encouragement to someone else. Someone may read your prayer request and realize, I'm not the only one going through this. Someone may see your testimony and find courage to pray again. Someone who has almost given up may decide to seek God one more time. So don't be ashamed of your prayer request. Write it down. Let this community stand with you. And remember this. The crowd may laugh at your faith today, but don't be ashamed of the one who gave his life for you. You don't have to respond to mockery with hatred. You don't have to answer anger with anger. You don't have to become cruel because someone has been cruel to you. Let your life testify. Let your patience testify. Let your forgiveness testify. Let your love testify. Because sometimes the person mocking Christ today may be the very person who kneels before him tomorrow. Sometimes the person who says, "I don't believe," may simply be someone who has never genuinely sought. Sometimes the person who looks furthest from God may be closer to asking the most important question of their life. And sometimes, the loudest voice in the room becomes the quietest heart when it finally encounters the truth. That night, Hamza's voice became quiet. But his heart had finally begun to speak. And I believe that was only the beginning. So wherever you are watching from tonight, remember, keep seeking, keep praying, keep trusting, and never stop believing that Jesus can change a life. If he could soften the heart of a man who once mocked his name, imagine what he can do in the heart of someone who is sincerely seeking him today. May God meet you in your place of need. May he strengthen you when you are weak. May he give you wisdom when you are confused. May he give you peace when you are afraid. May he restore your hope when you feel forgotten. And may you never forget the words of Jesus. Come unto me. Not tomorrow. Not when you become perfect. Not when you understand everything. Come. Come with your questions. Come with your pain. Come with your doubts. Come with your broken heart. Come with your prayer. And trust him with the rest. God bless you. Keep seeking. Keep praying. Keep trusting. And remember, the story isn't over just because you cannot see the ending yet.